Welcome to the COVID-19 Physician Learning Series, brought to you by Jewel and the Canadian Medical Association. I'm Dr. Jillian Horton. I'm a general internist, medical educator, writer, and podcaster, and I'm your host for this series. As this crisis evolves, some of our healthcare systems are being flooded with staggering numbers of critically ill patients. Doctors and nurses describe those scenes as war zones and battlefields. And while this experience may be foreign to us, its overtones have sounded all too familiar to Lieutenant-General the Honorable Roméo Dallaire. In today's conversation, it's our intention to highlight powerful emotional and moral lessons learned from General Dallaire's distinguished military career, including his time as Force Commander of the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. General Dallaire will also offer us key insights into managing our post-crisis risk of PTSD. General Dallaire, it is a privilege to be speaking with you today.
It's all mine. Thank you very much.
For anyone who's younger and perhaps not familiar with what transpired in Rwanda, could you briefly talk about the absolutely impossible circumstances under which you served there?
I was nearly going to say, I hope they read my book, but I won't say that. But a UN mission was sent in with the hope of assisting a nation resolve a civil war and ultimately bring peace. We were there simply to assist and to provide a sort of referee job. But ultimately, extremists on both sides, but mostly on the majority Hutu side, decided that they felt the peace agreement was not in their favor, and they ultimately commenced a civil war that also incorporated a genocide. They decided that by slaughtering all the opposition, they would be able to maintain power. So what happened is an ethnic genocide in Rwanda, to which I fear the international community before, during, and even in the ebbing parts, was simply not interested in engaging in providing the resources to, one, prevent it, two, to stop it, and three, ultimately, to negotiate a much more appropriate solution to the conflict. That being said, a small force that I had was reduced because of casualties, and we essentially witnessed for 3 months the slaughter of over 800,000 human beings, and the realization that the international community was easy to blame the UN for failing, but essentially forgot that every country making up the UN is the UN, and every country refused to provide us with the help we needed to prevent it, let alone stop the slaughter. And as such, they are all culpable of being complicit and letting a genocide run nearly its full course.
After I saw your powerful address to healthcare workers on social media, I had the chance to read one of your books, Waiting for First Light. And it struck me that part of understanding our own experiences is being given the right language to describe them. And we don't have that language in medicine because we don't have experiences on the scale of what you witness. How can framing our experiences in military language help us to get through this?
This is an extraordinary question because you absolutely must adopt a completely different lexicon to what is happening around you than a scenario that we are used to in a society like ours that hasn't seen war on its territory since for nearly 250 years, let alone has seen catastrophic failures of the scale that we're talking about. So with that, those who are in the front lines, because we have front lines. We've got people facing the threat, people who are engaged in trying to stop it, to help the casualties, to reduce the impact of this threat. Um, they are part of our ensemble. That is to say, we're all in it. It's not as if it's only them and we'll see how it works out. We're all part of it. We're all locked in and doing all kinds of restrictions and the like. And so we are in a campaign where with a whole bunch of different battles being played out in different hospitals and different care centers, in political structures where they feel embattled. And so campaigns are run within the context of a war. And so we're in a war against a threat. We're all in it. There's no exception. And in so doing, we must use that similar sort of atmosphere, that sort of tone to what's going on, versus a tone of, well, let's sort out the problem here and in our little local area or in our hospital, and we're achieving the aim. No, you're not. You're just one small part of the whole ensemble, and as such, you can gain strength by knowing everybody's in it with you, or you could feel overwhelmed by saying, how are we going to get out of this? Because we're all caught in it.
You were sent to Rwanda with totally inadequate supplies. And you talk about the UN start from zero system where you are required to figure out what you need and order it and hope that it comes instead of having it provided. And as a result, you were totally under-resourced. And I found myself thinking about the parallels between that experience and healthcare workers caring for patients with inadequate or, in some cases, no personal protective equipment. What moral guidance would you give to doctors and other healthcare providers about their duty both to others and self when they are faced with this same kind of mismatch?
It's it's very interesting that in the video you referred to earlier on, when I spoke about supporting the first responders, the health care personnel, a minister got back to me from a government, rather displeased that I mentioned that there probably won't be enough resources, and that is going to cause or is going to exacerbate some of the moral and ethical dilemmas that the first responder, the medical people, the doctors are going to face when they're going to be potentially, if not overwhelmed, but certainly in the midst of the full weight of the crisis. And it was sort of a reaction of, well, this is not a very positive statement. Well, the first thing is that you got to tell the troops the truth. And I think that what is essential for the medical staffs, the doctors and so on, is to recognize that they are in the front lines when they will not have all the resources needed. They're going to have to make choices that are going to be even more complicated because of the lack of resources and the near isolation that creates to the individual in having to stay to save a life or not being able to save a life, or seeing a life that he couldn't save, or alleviate the pain and the suffering of people because they know that either resources are somewhere else or they're simply just not been planned for or not acquired in due course. That is going to bring about a near sense of guilt of saying, I'm there to do that, but I don't have it. I've been doing everything I can, and is that enough? And so many years back, when I came back from Rwanda, I was asked, well, in fact, I was told, you did what you could, and nobody can expect more. That provided zero solace, zero, because you saw them, you smelled it, you touched it, you felt it, you lived it, you heard them cry, you could see in their eyes the pain and the suffering. And so the fact that you did everything you could will not as such alleviate the potential sense of guilt that, it didn't happen. That's where it is crucial that the profession and that the teams uh, do not let people isolate themselves, that they sense that they are part of an ensemble, that it is a big scenario in which they're playing a part, and that their part, it may be not always successful. Other parts may the same be in certain circumstances, but they're working within a construct of a massive involvement, and that they cannot hold themselves responsible or guilty for not having all that is required, nor should they even hold themselves accountable for saying, well, doing all the best I can just wasn't enough. No, that's wrong. You must communicate with colleagues. You must exchange. You've got to be communicating constantly between yourselves to sustain these pressures, sustain these stresses, and to be able to not let this sense of both rage and on one side and of a sense of near guilt take hold, because we need you for the long haul. We don't need you as a casualty in the early parts of it or in the throes of it, because that's just going to weaken the whole team. And that's why you must be able to exchange with colleagues, and you've got to face the fact that this is of such significance that you are pulling your weight. Then that's what we can only hope for in this time of crisis.
You share a story early on in Waiting for First Light that struck me as oddly familiar. Your executive assistant on the mission commented that you had concern and kindness to direct towards everyone other than yourself. And medicine is also a profession where we are not known for self care. We have a high suicide rate and a tendency to be martyrs and to brand people who try to set boundaries as inferior. How is that going to be a liability to us?
Anybody who's part of an organization, a profession, particularly when they wear a uniform, and you guys wear uniforms of varying types, of course, or work within a very organized structure, hierarchical or whatever, um, you come to realize that your organization is often very Darwinian. It doesn't tolerate not being able to give 100%. It has a serious problem with anybody that might be suffering, that is not overtly physical but maybe psychological, and as such is not able to perform to 100%. And so what is direly important is that we don't need commanders, leaders, heads, doctors who are in the most responsible positions to enter a role of, as you say, martyrdom or risk taking that will put them in a position of not being able to sustain the whole campaign. You will lose some battles, but losing some battles doesn't mean you lose the campaign, and it certainly doesn't mean you lose the war. But if you irresponsibly put yourself at risks by thinking that going flat out and not taking care, not ensuring that you're sustaining yourself in an appropriate way, that the people might think you should be doing a bit more, but you cannot, because it's not just today you got to worry about. You got to be there next week. You got to be there in weeks to come. You're going to have to keep that thing going. And as such, taking sort of the heroish type of position, to win a couple medals, no, that's not the way to do it. Not within the realm of responsibility that you have, because what you ultimately will be held accountable for is taking decisions that have put you in jeopardy, and as such, you're abandoning the people that need you, the people that still haven't come to your door, that will be needing you all the more into the future. And so How you fight that is by the institution, the individuals in the institution, of recognizing that they must be there for the long haul and they've got to sustain this thing. And the only way to do that is to ensure that they take decisions that are, yes, responsible, of course, but that they commit themselves to the extent that they can work it for the long haul and be capable of sustaining the pressures and strains and the ethical decisions and the wearing down that that will have over time. If they're not doing that, then the essential uh, conclusion to that is that uh, they weren't very professional about it.
Mm.
Professional means not just taking care of today. A profession means ensuring that you've got an eyeball out to the future also, and you're anticipating and you've got foresight on what's still coming down the road.
You talk so compellingly about re entering the world after your time in Africa
Mm.
and the discord between what you'd seen and the absurdity of abundance in the life that you came back to. Can you make some predictions for physicians working through this crisis about what those transitions might feel like and how we need to try to handle them?
It was uncanny that I'm in the midst of a genocide and waist deep in bodies with the smell and the gore and the destruction and the pain and the suffering and so on, and the depravities of resources and what we've seen on the ground. And yet I took a small 1 hour flight out of Rwanda, and I'm in Nairobi in a bustling town, as if nothing's happening, and people are looking at it from a detached perspective, trying to be objective and wanting to help, but not really living it. And so there is going to be a shock. It's going to be a shock that all of a sudden you're going to walk out of the environment that in which you are under so much stress and so much demand to see that other people are simply doing their thing, and that uh, doesn't necessarily push you to want to explain what has happened, because you come out of that with a feeling that they just won't understand. They've never been in combat. They've not been there. They've not smelled and touched and felt and heard what is happening. And so how do you describe that? And do you want to describe it again? Do you want to relive it as with them? And so you internalize this, and that's going to be nearly fatal. In fact, one of the great causes of suicide is the fact that we internalize it and isolate ourselves, and ultimately we self-destruct. There is an absolute critical need to find a reference out there, and references will come to you from peers, mostly peer support, people that you've known, people you trust, people you've seen who are willing them to listen, and that they'll listen and they won't ask a bunch of stupid questions and won't interrupt, and just let you vet and let the pain out and the rage out and let it live in the presence of another human being, and that other human being is simply listening, smiling a bit, crying a bit, but listening and letting you grasp the truism of an outside world that will never really understand, that you hope you'll be able to inculcate some elements of what happened, and that they have enough empathy and skills to be able to assist them in at least comprehending that you're injured, that you're hurting, that you're a walking wounded, that it's been honorable to work on those and to be hurt, and that there's not a shame there, and there's no stigma in having lived that. And if that can be passed on by that community around through the family and community and other and professionally, then you're going to build strength because they won't feel as if they're the only one that's hurting and as such uh, isolate themselves and ultimately make it some pretty stupid decisions.
You have concerns about the mental health of our profession after this is all over, and how that actually may be the phase where we are going to incur the most casualties. How else can we as a profession begin to mitigate that risk right now?
There is, in the part of the leadership of your organization, the professional sort of collegial milieu that you have, uh, there is an absolute need of being very conscious and making people very conscious that when this overt enemy is defeated, the effects of the war may raise exponentially on you and on your team and on the demands of you because uh, the wounds that have been acquired during the campaign, you don't necessarily feel them to their full strength because you're going flat out and your professional instincts often take over as they should, and they can fill the time. And I used to make my guys work till they dropped so that they didn't dream, they didn't have time to think, they just slept, and then bingo, they're back into it. But as this campaign goes down, and as we look at transitioning into the post crisis, then all that adrenaline is going to disappear. And it happens fairly fast. All what you've seen, all those wounds that were cut open in your minds and so on, are now going to start to hurt, which is different than simply when they happened. And because of that, it's going to ask for more support, more help. So just just as foolishly as we saw governments, at the end of the war, cut all resources and everything, particularly for people at a time when, and I remember after Afghanistan, when I was in the Senate Defense Committee, saying, hey, when Afghanistan ends, that's when the casualties, the real number of casualties are going to start appearing. And that's exactly what happened. And so preparing yourself for a second round, that the first round is defeat the enemy. The second round is to bring you back to a level that you can sustain and ultimately evolve into a new future. And that means being able to handle those wounds, and those wounds need professional help. You can't do it alone. It's impossible. And so the entity, be it the corporate body, be it the sisterhood, brotherhood of the profession, be it just colleagues, be it also those who can be close to you, that love you, and that are willing to sustain the impact that this has had, and seeing you all of a sudden hurting overtly because the operational demands of the job won't be the same, yet the impact of the injuries will have escalated. And so that's when you become exceptionally vulnerable. And so you prepare people for that. You say there's going to be another round, and that round, so where are the tools to be able to handle bringing those walking wounded back down to a certain level of normality? They'll never forget what happened, but can they live with it and continue? That's what you got to work towards.
General, you talked about how the experience of being in Rwanda made you care more about humanity. What kind of social change or transformation might you predict coming out of this experience for us on the other side?
I think this can evolve into an extraordinary transition for us into a far more mature society, that we've all been in this together, and we've all hurt to varying levels, but we've all lived it, and it's not going to disappear. And so it's a reference point that our society can refer to and say, did we grow with this, or did we fail, or did we fall apart, or in fact, did we have the right leadership, and will the future leadership be able to handle such scenarios because of the experience of this? I think that's one significant overriding element. There are two, however, groups in our society that I think are going to take on a different perspective. And I hope we're smart enough to realize it. The first one, and not necessarily in the order, but the first one that I want to speak to is the youth under 25. This enemy is attacking the older people. The younger people are not being attacked to the same scale. Yet it is an opportunity for those who are young to hold the generations between the 25 and the 70s accountable for doing things right. And they should be engaged and committed and vocal and pulling all the revolutionary skills they have of the communications world, social media, to keep the pressure on. They can come out as a new leading force within our society. So that's, I think, really, really important. And the second one is women. The front lines are just chock-a-block with women. They are fighting that battle in the majority. And so it is an opportunity for the male-dominated societies that we still have to realize that there's no way that that can continue, that the women must be perceived as a full-fledged, totally committed, and willing to take casualties to keep our society going just as much as men, and probably better in certain circumstances than men are. And so there is an opportunity with this, that women grow within our society, not that they are not themselves having to grow, but that their stature, that their ability to sustain our society will grow with this, and that the society will adjust. We could shave 25 years off of the gender problems and the glass ceilings with this experience if we're smart enough to realize it. And I do hope that the men come to the full realization, and that women use this as a pivot for their future.
General Dallaire, I am so honored and
You're welcome.
profoundly moved and uplifted after speaking with you today.
Well, stay at it, and keep me in mind as you start thinking about the post-crisis. As I want to be engaged, and I'm talking with the political people, but I think I can be maybe of assistance of helping people explain what the hell has happened to them, and how they can evolve into the normalcy after being injured on this campaign.
And before we go, I also want to extend my deepest thanks and gratitude on behalf of my colleagues everywhere for your wisdom and for your service to our country.
I'm just an old soldier. Thank you very much.
I'm Dr. Jillian Horton. Thank you for joining us for this COVID-19 webinar series powered by Jewel. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for all that you do. And I'll see you again soon.